Hi, George. Haas here. Wanted to talk about the second module of meditation interventions for the addiction process. This is organized around evaluating stress, anger, and depression as causal to relapse. Stress being pretty much anything. So we live in these biochemical bodies, and to sense anything means that the chemistry changes. So you can really consider anything to be stress. If we have an emotional situation that happens to us in reaction to the present moment and it's in the normal bandwidth that we can just tolerate, then nothing much has to happen. But if there's an emotional event that exceeds our ordinary capacity for regulation, then the body-mind needs to regulate that. We really don't have a choice about whether we regulate or not. It's a question of how we do it. We're conditioned to do it based on the experiences that we had as children. We essentially learn the qualities of regulation or the skill set of regulation from the caregivers that we have. We basically use the way of regulating that they used. We learn it from them. So the reason that we talk about stress and anger is that if we use an emotional regulation process that includes generating anger or any afflictive emotional experience, could be sadness, fear, shame, regret, whatever it is that we use, something happens, it exceeds our capacity to regulate. There's an emotional event that needs to be regulated, and then the mind reaches into the tool bag of regulation tools it has, and we begin the process of regulation. If that process means that we're thinking thoughts that generate anger as a way of regulating the experience of the present moment, then the body-mind fills with anger. Afflictive emotion like anger is increasing the stress on the body in a kind of vicious cycle. If the experience of anger persists for too long, then the chemical soup gets too rich in saturation, and then the body-mind needs to adjust itself by regulating that richness. And typically what it begins to do is shut down the ability to think clearly, since the thinking is what's generating the anger. Shutting down your cognitive ability makes you more prone to relapse because you can't tell the difference between, say, a self-soothing strategy and an actual plan of action. So if you're using a strategy of remembering or thinking about using as a way of regulating, then you are much more prone to following through on that as an actual plan of action rather than as a self-soothing strategy, because your cognitive ability is diminished. But also you can go into depression as a result of that. So the cognitive mind shuts down, and then if the activity of generating strong afflictive emotion continues, then the limbic system shuts down and you go into a period of not generating any emotion, so that the liver has time to filter out all of the chemicals that were required to create the emotional experience. So the depression typically lasts as long as it takes for the liver to filter out all of those neurochemicals and bring you back into a normal range of saturation of neurochemicals. And then the limbic system turns back on, you have feeling back, but if you continue to have strong, difficult emotions in reaction to the present moment, the mind can then just flip on the afflictive emotion generating story. And then you're in this cycling depression, which is very typical of people who have addiction. We want to begin to monitor the thinking process so that we can see what strategies we're using for self-generated emotion. It isn't that thinking as a way of regulating emotion is a bad idea as a whole. We want to be able to skillfully regulate our emotions through the thinking process. Um, so we're monitoring our thought processes to see what stories or themes we're using. Typically, we have a handful of themes, say if we use anger, that generate anger, a handful that generate sadness if we use sadness, a handful that generate fear if we use fear. The sense of this, of course, is not because these are the optimal strategies, the generation of anger, say, to regulate difficult present moment experience, but that this is the conditioning that we received as children. It's really the family system of regulating emotion. We just learned it as children, dutifully, smartly, rightly, and then have continued to use these as strategies for regulating emotion because that's what we've done. The Zen people have a saying, "What water?" asked the fish. If it's something that you've always done, it may not seem out of the ordinary. It may not even be noticeable, kind of like the wallpaper. So you want to focus on the strategies that you're using to regulate your emotion and make sure that if there's an afflictive experience being generated as a means of regulating the present moment, that you suppress that, stop using it, and replace it with an alternative. It isn't that you have a choice about regulating your emotions or not. You have to do that. Regulating emotion is a requirement. What's different is the possibility of regulating with a different choice than what you've been using. The strategies that we have for regulating emotion are procedural memory, so that we learn the procedure of regulating emotion, so that you'll notice as you explore this that one emotional reaction to the present moment is regularly regulated by the creation of a different emotion. It masks, distracts, takes you away from the experience of the present moment. The conditions of the present moment come and go, and then the body-mind returns you to the experience of the present moment, shutting down the self-generated emotion. The reason that this is a concern around lapsing or relapsing in the use of substances or behaviors is because substances and behaviors are a way of regulating emotion, and the depression is often intolerable, or the extreme emotion that's needed to regulate the present moment is often intolerable, and so it reduces our cognitive ability. We become depressed, and then we look for a way out of the depression. In addiction, one of the main drivers of it is social isolation, so that you pull away from other people in the depression, you pull away from the other people in anger, or people are repulsed by the intense emotional experience. And in the social isolation, the pain of living becomes also unbearable, and so you look for these strategies for regulating emotion that don't really require other people. You have to regulate, so the systems that you've developed to use to regulate in the absence of other people are the ones that you turn to. So ideally, of course, when you're emotionally dysregulated, the gold standard then is to turn to other people and have them help you co-regulate, have them help you come back into balance. So in terms of this examination, we would be looking for meditation strategies that you can use to examine the self-generated emotion system, often watching from auditory thinking space, listening to what the mind is doing. Not everyone is auditorily based. Some people are visually based in thinking, so you could also watch the imagery that arises to see whether some of it can drive strong emotion. Tracking the thought process in audio and visual, and then dropping down into the body, looking for the emotion that the thought process is generating. When you've made the connection between the thought processes that generate the emotion you can set that system aside and explore the experience of the present moment for the underlying feeling state. I think that you'll find if you can bring your mindfulness to the experience of the present moment and hold it with enough equanimity that the mind will shut down the self-generated emotion. You won't have to do anything else. But it would be ordinary to find that the conditions of the present moment are creating such a strong emotional experience that you're unable to come into equanimity with the present moment. And then you'll notice that the mind turns the self-generated emotion back on. It would be very surprising for someone to come out of their family system with tools that are all unskillful. So some of the strategies that you have from your family system are going to be useful in regulating your emotion, and some are going to be stressful or afflictive. And so you want to foster the ones that are useful, reinforce them, and you want to suppress the ones that are not useful. In doing an inventory of what skill set you have available to you, the skill set that's useful you foster and continue, the skill set that's afflictive you suppress, but you may find that you have a deficit of skills to regulate all emotional situations in that case. So then what you would want to do is to develop additional skills to replace the ones that are afflictive so that you have a full set available to you. I would be going with a noting feeling states technique, for instance, as a way of regulating emotion. It seems to be one of the best on the Vipassana side. And then with a metta practice to regulate emotion on the heart practice or metta side of it. The main way of determining which one to use is that the Vipassana is good when you're on your own, during pursuing your own path, and the metta is better when you're in relationship to other people in the present moment that you're working. Although you could do it both ways. If you wanted to do a Vipassana-style noting feeling states technique to regulate your emotion and you're with other people, you could first note your own emotion and then note theirs, and then note your own, note theirs. So there's some sense of connection there that what people often experience with someone doing a Vipassana practice while they're standing engaged in conversation with them is that the meditator seems withdrawn. If you do a metta practice, noting metta, or practicing and radiating metta for yourself, and then radiating metta for the person that you're with, and radiating metta for yourself. So back and forth, a way of engaging in the present moment at the same time regulating. All right, thanks.